So welcome everyone to this session on evidence-based literacy practices that you can use with students and that you can teach with families to use at home. My name is Michelle Cheney and I am the Impact Coordinator. Let me tell you just a little bit about Impact. Impact is a consortium incentive grant project. There are 8 member states: Arizona, Arkansas, Colorado, Georgia, Kentucky, Iowa, Montana, and Pennsylvania, who's our lead states. Our mission is to increase and improve family engagement. We are specifically focused on how parents and caregivers, siblings, and other extended family members can be more directly involved in the learning process, especially at home. I encourage you today to use the chat room and your reaction buttons to interact with me and with each other. These are located at the bottom of your screen if you've not seen those before. And I know there's a good number of folks that were registered for this session, so I may not be able to see all of your comments in real time or your questions in real time. I know our facilitator, our session facilitator is helping to monitor the chat box. But if I miss something, I will go back through the chat after the presentation and make sure that I follow up with anything that's in there that we don't address today. Or if I don't see it, feel free to repost it in there so it's front and center as we get close to the end. I don't want to leave anybody with questions that can't be answered. All right, so since we're talking about reading today, I wanted to share some quotes about reading that I like. Take a look. Which one resonates with you? And as you read through those and think about them, the one that really struck me when I first read it is, if you don't like to read, you haven't found the right book. It's the last one. I know when there's a really good book and I'm enjoying it tremendously, I can't put it down. When I'm not fond of a book or when I'm having a hard time getting into it, I can't pick it up. And so just think about those quotes. And I saw somebody pop something into the chat box. I imagine it's which one is resonating with you, or there you go, the last one. Thank you. All right, this time I am going to ask you to pop something in the chat box. Since we're talking about reading, and one of the things about that is how students are selecting their reading topics and the books that are interesting to them. And we'll dig into that a little bit more in just a little bit. Because we want kids and families to remember that reading can be fun. And if you're a striving reader, reading isn't always fun. Reading may not be fun at school for you when the material isn't something that you selected, or when it's hard and anything that you have to do with it is tied to a grade. And so part of our mission is to remind kids that reading can be enjoyable. So I want to ask you what you like to read. I'm always looking for a good book recommendation. And when I use the word book, I use that broadly to mean a lot of text or any kind of reading. So magazines, news articles, a blog, anything. So take a second and type into the chat what you're interested in. If you look in the upper left-hand corner, I've got 2 books there. These are actually books that I would recommend, books that I've read, materials that I like to look at. But the 2 in the upper left-hand corner are both by Kristin Hannah. Kristin's one of my favorite authors. She writes historical fiction, and I just finished reading The Women, which is about the women in Vietnam, who were mostly in the medical units as nurses, which that's what's portrayed in this book. And so just a powerful, really powerful writer. So let me see some of the recommendations you've popped in the chat. All right, we've got some good authors, some books, some genres. Very nice. Oh, somebody's read Verity, Colleen Hoover. Awesome. All right, so as you think about that, if you've got some specific titles, pop them in there. Like I said, I'm always looking for my next good book. All right, so let's dig into what's happening today. Here's our list of evidence-based reading practices that I'm going to talk about. I want to give a little bit of the history here. So Impact, our consortium, worked with the Evidence Resource Center, which is located in Pennsylvania, to review reading research, leading us to the practices that are listed on this slide. So if you're interested in the research, which came through the Evidence Resource Center, but from materials in the What Works Clearinghouse, a number of the practice guides that they have that are designed for educators. You can take a look at what the Evidence Resource Center put together for our consortium. It is on our consortium website, which is impactmep.net, and in a second I'll drop that in the chat, but IMPACT-MEP.net. And what the Evidence Resource Center did is put together a beautiful 25-page, I hesitate to call it a report, how about a summary of the reading research that they found through the What Works Clearinghouse. And then they provided a presentation to our impact member states on the different practices. And out of everything that they reviewed, again, this is what we're taking a look at today and what we're using for some of our work this year behind the scenes. So book selection, we just talked about how the right book is really important. We want one that's interesting to the kids and one that they can read at home when the migrant tutor or advocate or, the teacher isn't there. So those are important factors, especially for motivation. We're going to be talking about a book introduction. This helps prepare the mind to receive the information in the book or the text. And that's important so that we're not driving into books or digging into books cold, and teaching kids not to just jump right in and start reading, but help their mind get ready for the read. Whenever we talk about reading, we've got to do a little bit of word work. We're always going to come across words that we're not sure of. We don't know what they mean. And so how are we going to think about what kids can do at home with word work and what their families can help them with or how they can help them so that they can better understand the words used in the reading. We're going to talk a little bit about how to use read alouds and how to teach your families to use read alouds. Hearing the text being read aloud or reading it aloud can create an awareness for the reader that's different from when they're reading silently. And this will help address and move along some of those fluency skills. And then, of course, questioning. Questioning helps the reader interact with the text and raise comprehension. And of course, that's critical. We're going to talk about questioning before, during, and after the reading. And then the last one is rereading. Those of you who are parents, aunties, uncles, babysitters, you probably know that especially the little kids, the little ones, they'll bring you the same book over and over and over and want you to read the same one over and over and over. And you probably think to yourself, let's pick a new book. We've read this one 100 times. But actually, research shows that rereading the same book with different purposes, with a different lens each time, really helps the kids to understand more about what they're reading and help them improve their reading skills. All right. So we're going to start with the book or text selection. I use the word book pretty generically to mean a book, a magazine, a passage. So when I say book, think text. We're going to start with a couple of thoughts on how to select text for the students and help them learn how to select text for themselves so that they'll be able to read and enjoy at home on their own and with their family members. But we have to keep in mind that family may not always be able to support them in the same way that an educator in school would, or a migrant staff member would, a migrant tutor, advocate, recruiter. And so also there's a little bit of background here I'm going to weave in just so that you have like the full scope of how these strategies work and under what circumstances they work. So I have to start off by saying the strategies that we selected for our work, the ones that I'm sharing with you today, can effectively be used with students who can read. So they have to have at least a basic fundamental level of reading. And these strategies will help them to improve their reading skills, improve their comprehension, and hopefully improve their love of reading, right? We want to create lifelong readers. If students are emergent readers, meaning that they're still at the stage where they're learning things like letters and sounds and how those are connected or how sounds move around in the words, when they hear words, and they're not really being able to identify words on pages yet and read them, even if it's 4 or 5 words in a sentence. These are not the strategies for those kids. We are not working with our kids and families through these strategies who are in that emergent stage of reading. And this is important to remember because, we're hopefully preparing the kids and their families to use the strategies at home. Like I said, when a teacher or a tutor is not there, parents and caregivers may not be able to read the materials to the students. And so we want to set them up for success. And then one of the non-negotiables in doing that is that the students need to have some basic reading abilities. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to match their reading abilities and their reading level to the level of the text. So foundational to the success of these strategies is the idea that students get reading materials that they are interested in first and foremost, because as I said, we want to build lifelong readers, and interest helps with motivation. We all just dropped in the chat, genres or authors or books that we like to read, things that interest us will raise our motivation and capture our attention more than things that don't interest us. And so that's going to be pivotal. When you start working with kids and teaching them and their families these strategies, or using these strategies yourself as you're working with your families, you want to make sure that you understand what kids are interested in and that we're starting from a place of interest when you select or help them learn to select reading materials. Additionally, I've mentioned probably a couple of times already that kids will need to be able to read the book on their own. And so as you're practicing with the kids, if you're there with them, the book can be a little bit more challenging, right? If an educator, a teacher at school is working with kids, the book can be a little bit more challenging because someone is there to assist them. But with the strategies that we're talking about today, we're hoping that kids and their families will use them when you're not there. And in order for them to be able to manage this, the books have to be at the student's independent reading level. Let me just, so yeah, the books have to be at their independent reading level. So we're going to have to figure out a couple of things here. Let me just move to the next slide. We're going to have to figure out what the student's reading level is, and then what the level of the book is, so we can make this match. And there's some good ways to do this, and then there's some quick and easy ways to do this that are a little bit less effective, but not horrible. And so let me talk a little bit about those, right? So for the students to be able to practice the strategies that we're going to talk about effectively in the home when someone is not there who's an educator to help them, and knowing that parents in all of our migrant homes might not be able to help the children, we need them to be able to read with about a 93 to 95% accuracy rate. So that means finding their independent reading level. The best way to do this is to talk to someone at school, or if your migrant team has someone that has access to this information or is a reading specialist, has that kind of background. What you're really looking for is you're looking for the student's reading level and then the readability or level of the text that you're going to give the student so that they can manage this book on their own at home. The one thing I would like to say is it is under these conditions, with these strategies that we're going to show today, that we're asking the families to use and practice at home, that the kids need to be able to manage the book on their own, and that we really want to match the reading level of the book to the student's reading level. Under other circumstances, I often encourage students to select books just based on the topic or that they like them. And if it's not a level they can manage on their own, look to someone else to help them read the book or to read the book to them, because we want to encourage children to love a lot of different kinds of reading materials, a lot of different kinds of books. And we don't always need them to be right at their reading level, because there are a lot of different opportunities for other people to be able to share the books with the kids and help them enjoy the books if they can't manage them on their own. But for this, we need the kids to be able to read on their own. If you don't have access to the student's reading level, or having trouble understanding, like, what is the readability of the book? Would this student that you're working with be able to manage this text? One of the other things that you can do is, it's called the quick 5-finger rule. It'll help you kind of sort out that 93 to 95% accuracy. And really what they're talking about here is opening up a book and having the student read a little bit of it. If it's a longer text, have them read a paragraph. If it's just a couple of sentences, the sentences are short and to the point, like, my dog ate my homework. Have the students read a couple of the sentences. And if they miss in those short sentences more than 1 or 2 words, the book might be too hard. In the longer passages, if it's a paragraph of 100 words or so and they miss more than 5 to 6 or 7, it might be too hard for them to read on their own. So basically what the strategy is, if you don't have access to a student's reading level and understanding of the readability of a book or the reading level of a book, is, to start with a book that you think would be at the student's reading level and open it up and have them read a little bit of it and see how much of it they can do successfully and how much of it they stumble on or don't know, to see if it's too hard. All right. With that kind of background and setup behind us now, I want to dig right into some of those strategies that we're talking about. So let me ask you this. What do you like to read, or what movies do you see? How do you decide? What's your decision-making process? It probably comes down to a few pretty common reasons that you decide to pick up a book or go see a movie. And I'm, using movies here with the analogy also. And you can type in the chat box, like, what spurs you on to pick up a book? How do you decide, out of all the books out there, which ones you're going to read? All right, so maybe you get a recommendation from a friend or a family member. Somebody tells you about it. I'm in a book club, and so very often, not only are we reading the book for our monthly book club, but somebody else in there is talking about another book that they read outside of book club, and I'm writing down the name and the author. What about the book jacket? Or with movies, it's the trailer that you might see on TV. It's the poster that gives a little bit of it away, just like the book cover, right? So somewhere you see or read something about it or hear something about it. And then lastly, one of your other reasons for picking up a book or another, type of reading, another text, might be the review that you read in a newspaper or some other online source, like a blog. And so if you look below, I've got just an example here. In The Great Alone, one of my all-time favorite books, this is a little excerpt from the book jacket. Ernst Albright, a former prisoner of war, POW, comes home from the Vietnam War, a changed and volatile man. When he loses yet another job, he makes an impulsive decision. He will move his family north to Alaska, where they will live off the grid in America's last true frontier. So the covers, the book jackets, the recommendations, the reviews, these are important pieces because they tell us a little bit about what the book is going to be about. And people in marketing, people in the movie industry, people in publishing, they know this. That's why they dress up the book covers. That's why they give us an excerpt to read. That's why with movies, they create the trailers. I've got The Runaway Bride here. You can probably look at that, and just from the actors and the way the picture is set up, tell me a little bit about it, even if you've never seen the movie, right? Julia Roberts almost always stars in romantic comedies, so it's likely a rom-com, clearly about a bride. And the list goes on. You look at Harry Potter, you can look at the title, you can look at the book cover, and you can start to ascertain a little bit about what the book is going to be about. This is important because this is called a book introduction. And this is one of our very first strategies that I want you to think about teaching the families or using with the families when you're working with them. It's an easy and quick thing to teach the kids. Show them how to look at and talk about the cover. So the picture and the title, that's a good place to start. Show them how to open the book and flip through pages. They're going to look at some of the other pictures. If it's nonfiction, maybe it's got charts and graphs in there. Have them read the first page or the first paragraph if it's a longer text for older children. And then show families how to make a prediction. I think blank is going to happen. Or how to set an intention. You may not always be able to make a prediction with nonfiction, but how to set an intention from looking at those first few pictures, charts, graphs, cover, etc. So an intention might be, I want to find out blank. This short 3-minute activity really prepares the brain so that it's ready when the child begins to read. We don't want kids and families opening books cold and jumping into the reading without getting your mind ready, activating prior knowledge, creating a schema, a framework for receiving the information, which a warm-up or a book introduction does. Let me just pause there real quick. I see some comments coming in the chat. I'll scroll down, take a quick look. Okay, new participants coming in. Great, welcome. All right, so the book introduction, short, simple, easy, can be done in any language. If kids select books in English and parents are not able to read the books, they're still able to engage in a conversation about what the picture looks like. Child can paraphrase the book jacket. They can open it up and look through it together, and child can help bridge any gap. But parents can still participate in getting the mind ready to receive the information. Think about if a friend has ever recommended a book or asked you to go to a movie with them and you're not sure what it's about. You jump in the car, you get to the theater, and you're like 30-40 minutes into the movie before you start to put the pieces together. Same thing with a book. If it's a novel and I haven't bothered to look at the book jacket or understand a little bit about what the book is going to be about, then I'm probably in like chapters 5 or 6, a third of the way through the book before the pieces start coming together. So it's better to know a little bit about what it's about, what you're going to be doing with it and thinking about before jumping in cold. It's a quick, easy, but very powerful thing to do. All right. So we can't talk about reading strategies without talking about word work. And so figuring out unknown words. What I want you to do is to think about when you're pleasure reading and you come across a word you don't know, what happens? And actually drop that into the chat because it's a little bit different than what we might do with words at school when the teacher's there to help us. So you come across a word you don't know at home. What happens when you're reading for pleasure? All right, here come some responses. Look for parts of the word that you do know, use context clues, Google it, look up the definition. All right, all correct. We probably approach it slightly differently than what would happen in a classroom, even if you're looking up a definition. So I'm the first one to pick up my phone, and if it's a place they mention that I'm not familiar with, I'll Google it, right? I'll look at a map on my phone to see where is this country, this town, this whatever. If it's a word, that's completely unknown to me, I might pull the definition, but I'm not copying the definition. I'm not trying to take away the dictionary definition with me. What I'm trying to do is get a look and feel for the word, right? Maybe I pull a picture, an image, some other visual representation of it. I don't need a full-on detailed definition as much as I need enough of something, an image, or maybe another word that means the same or similar, a synonym, so that when I go back in and read the sentence, the paragraph, they have more meaning, right? So what we're recommending here is to show the kids and the families how to do a quick 4-square activity. So they take a little piece of paper, they make 4 squares on it, and they pick the word they don't know when they've read through the book after they did their book introduction, and they start to get a look and feel for it. And so maybe they talk to somebody in their family and say, this is kelp. Here's the picture in the book. So we found a picture, and now my mom says, oh, yo sé, es kelpo. And she can explain it, right? She knows the word in her native language and she can explain it to the child. The pictures are helpful, drawings, images, photos. Maybe the child Googles the definition on his phone or his parents' phone and sees words that he does recognize. Seaweed. Oh, it's like an underwater forest. So with 4 squares, we don't have to come away with that dictionary definition. What we want to come away with is something that provides more insight into what the word means. Something that when the student goes back and reads that sentence, it helps them conjure the image, or it helps them better understand what the whole sentence means. I like to remind students and families to focus on what they can find and what they can understand, and not on what they can't. This is also, again, a 2 or 3 minute activity because we're not looking at copying dictionary definitions or writing sentences with the words or some of the other kind of vocabulary practices that you might see in school, which are great for school. Not for when the kiddos are at home trying to make meaning from the text that they're reading, the book that they're reading, right? So we want them kind of looking on their phone, maybe finding some pictures, talking to family members who might be able to explain it or describe it, even if that's in another language, who might be able to give them the word in another language, might be able to draw a picture, anything for that look and feel. Okay, so reading aloud. Reading aloud is our next strategy. And reading aloud really helps with fluency. Fluency refers to the rate and accuracy of what's being read. It contributes to comprehension. If kids read too slow, if they're trying to sound out the words, if they don't know too many of the words, that's going to impede comprehension. Fluency also incorporates general language knowledge, like stopping, kids knowing to stop at the end of sentences, or the inflection, the way your voice goes up at the end when there's a question, right? When it's a question. So it's also encompassing the music, the rhythm, and the flow of language. So a couple of practices here. You've got 3 listed on the screen in front of you. So one is students being able to listen to a reading of the text that they have, the book that they've selected, and follow along as it's being read. So as they're listening to a proficient reader read the story, and if it's fiction and it's dramatic and it's got characters and the reading portrays all of that, all the better, right? They're listening to it, they're following along, they're seeing as they read the words how a word that they may not have known how to pronounce, they're hearing it being pronounced, and they're hearing the music of the language, the rhythm, the ebb and flow of how it goes, right? The kids can also read aloud. Maybe they're going to read aloud to a pet. Maybe they're going to read aloud to a younger sibling. Maybe they're going to read aloud to an older sibling. Maybe they're going to read aloud to their parents. So the children reading aloud is also very helpful. And remember, because the book is selected at a level that the students can manage on their own, they will likely be able to read it aloud very well and just have that as a practice, right? Being able to practice the ability to read aloud and, think about how the flow of the language is going. If they have the ability to record themselves, they can always go back and listen to their own recordings, which a lot of families can do on phones, and then talk about it. What did they think went well? What did they think maybe they want to work on or didn't go so well? They can engage in that conversation with family. Family doesn't have to understand exactly what each word is that the child's reading aloud, for them to listen attentively, for them to ask questions about it in any language, and the student to be able to engage while reading aloud to other members of the family. And so 3 ways that fluency piece or that reading aloud piece can really come together. And if students can do all 3, fantastic. I just wanted to bring to your attention this site, and there are many others like it. So it's Unite for Literacy. On Unite for Literacy, you will see free online reading resources. It's the books are mostly aimed at students in the elementary grades, but because there's a lot of nonfiction here, think about your slightly older English learners who may be reading at a lower level. Nonfiction is really good for them. We don't want to give them books with little kids in them when they're older learners, but we need high interest, lower reading level books. So there's a lot of nonfiction here that would work for older learners. And it comes in multiple languages. The site does a read aloud. It's just really fantastic. Oh, it's great on your cell phone. Many of the families may not have computers to be able to pull this up on, but they can pull up the stories on their cell phones. So here's just an example of one of the pages. This is from the Ocean book that's in there. And what I wanted to point you to is under the page where the English is written, right? So this book is in English. It does give you a Spanish option. What that option in Spanish does is provides a translation, not the words on the page. Those are going to remain in English, but the narrator is going to basically translate what this page is in Spanish. So other family members who may not be proficient in English, but can listen to the Spanish, will also know what is going on in the book. And if you have students who are working on continuing to be bilingual, learning their native language, which in this case I'm using as an example is Spanish, alongside learning English, this is also good for them to hear as they're reading the book in English, to be able to hear it in Spanish as well. And so just kind of a nod to this fantastic resource, Unite for Literacy. All right, so the book talk is really about questioning. We want kids talking about books. And so I want to just talk about the value of teaching families about questioning and discussion. This should take place before they read, while they read, and after they read. And hopefully with some of those other activities that I just shared, those other evidence-based strategies, you see opportunities for families to engage together. So the first one, that book talk, that book introduction, allows them to talk about what they think the book is about and what they're seeing before they dig in. When they're discussing vocabulary and words, they're talking together and exploring what meanings are. So the talking and the questioning need to be happening throughout the book. But here's a way to look at just another set of questions that you might use at the end. And so we've got a set of questions here about what students like didn't like, what their favorite parts were. You'll see that none of these are really yes, no questions. A lot of them I'm wanting to require or wanting more information. So did anything surprise you? Yes, but why? What surprised you? Give me the example. Give me the story. Extend the conversation. Don't leave it with the single word answer. If it's helpful for some of your families, maybe giving them sentence starters rather than full open-ended sentences. That could be helpful for some of our English learner families. And really, any questions work. The idea that you want to keep in mind is to get the families to make connect in a few different ways. So usually when we're talking about books, we talk about making a connection to the book on a personal level. So between the book and self. We can talk about book to book connections. You know, I just read this book on oceans, and that reminds me of another book I read, or an article that the teacher had in school, or something else that was on the same topic. So text to text, book to book. And then the last piece is like between the book and our world, or community for kids. Their world is a little bit smaller than global world, but community. And so getting them to think and ask questions that help them connect to themselves and their own interests and their own learning, connect to other things that they've read on the same topic, or connect to their community or their world. So let me give you an example. Maybe we read something on recycling, and one of the questions that we're discussing that my family came up with is like, what can we do at home? How can we recycle at home? How can we reduce pollution at home? So this is a connection between first text and self, like what can I personally do? But maybe we decide to recycle, and we set up like a little bin in our house, and we find out where the recycling has to go. So now I'm interacting between what I read and the community, what needs to happen with my community, with my family, outside myself. So just a couple examples about how those questions can be connected personally with other things that have been read and with other things in the children's surroundings. If families need additional questioning support, this is a fun, inexpensive beach ball activity that you can do. So grab a little plastic beach ball from the dollar store, blow it up, and put one of each of these words in each of the slices on the beach ball. So for example, I might put who in the yellow, what in the black, where in the dark gray, and so on. And then family members can toss the ball to each other. And whatever word is facing the person that catches the ball is the word that they have to use to create a question. And then others in the circle can answer. So if my mom tosses me the ball and who is facing me, then I have to come up with a who question based on the book or the text that I just read. So my who question on my recycling book might be, who's going to start recycling in this family? Who's willing to recycle in our family? And then hopefully my family members all say, we're all going to do it. This is also great for teaching the key questioning words. When we think about questions, you know, the WH question words are sort of the foundations of questioning. And folks are not always aware of what each of these types of words, what each of these words requires in terms of a response. So what I'm talking about is, for example, when you ask who, the response should be a person. When you ask where, the response should be a location. When you ask when, you're talking about a timeline, right? It might be a period in time, it might be a month, it might be a day, it might be an hour, but you're looking at something to do with time. And so teaching kids those connections through their questioning is a really good thing to do. And it's fun. They all like to toss the ball around. We have to remind them not to take each other out when they toss the ball. All right. I've mentioned a couple of times, and I just want to reiterate here, that I encourage the use of any and all languages for these activities. The use of a student's native language is always a tool for learning, and there's a ton of research to support that. Um, and for learning English, right? One of the most damaging things we can say is only use English. Practice only English, because you can't practice what you don't know. And so I encourage you to do a little research on a term called translanguaging. And I'm just going to oversimplify, which is to say that that means using any and all languages, a student using any and all languages they can to communicate and to convey meaning, even if it's in the same sentence. My mom va a la casa, right? So I'm using English and Spanish in the same sentence, but translanguaging. And so thinking about this, using multiple languages to describe unknown words when we're doing word work, we highlighted that. Asking and answering questions in any language, even if the reading was in English, students and their family members talking about the book and asking and answering questions in their native language. Looking for books in multiple languages, even if we're reading in both English and another language. Kids can read the English while their parents are reading Spanish, for example. Sometimes we get into that situation where maybe the English is the dominant language for the children, and so giving them the book in Spanish wouldn't be really helpful. But parents and kids can work in any and all languages. And we know that using all the languages, working between languages, strengthens their reading skills, because these strategies work in any language. It strengthens their ability to learn English. They have a stronger foundation of language in general to hook English to, and it will strengthen their overall learning strategies. I'm just going to pop up to the chat box. I saw a couple of questions come in. Oh, you call it Spanglish. Yeah, I'm gonna pop this in here. Translanguaging. When I was an ESL teacher for a long time, and when I first started back in the late 80s, early 90s, we used to call it code switching, right? So knowing kind of which language, which mix of languages to use in certain circumstances. That has kind of transformed into something that's much more accurate, which is translanguaging. And in the beginning, and again, we're talking what, 35 years ago, folks used to think that switching back and forth between the languages was a deficit. But we've actually learned that it's an asset, and it requires a deep subconscious knowledge of both languages that the student is switching between. So, grammar, vocabulary, and the ability for the mind to process simultaneously and back and forth, it is really kind of a cool thing. So if you guys are into language, look up translanguaging, read a little bit more about it. But the takeaway is to encourage families to use all and any languages they can when we talk about these strategies and reading together and having family literacy time. And of course, always be sure to check in with your migrant program, with your school district, with your state, to know if there are any, guidelines around what languages to use while you're on work time or how to use them. Every state's a little bit different, but from a research perspective, all languages are assets, and using all of them is a great tool. Okay. Lastly, I mentioned a little bit earlier about the power of kids rereading the same text. And so rereading with different purposes helps them to build confidence and increase comprehension. So we want to show kids how to reread the same book using those 4 strategies that we just talked about. So the first time they're going to do a book introduction, they're going to look at that title, the picture, they're going to open it up and dig in a little bit, and then they're going to read. Maybe the second time they read through the book and they come across that word or two they don't know, They do a little digging, they talk to their family about the word, they get a sense of what it is, and they go back and they read that sentence or that paragraph, or maybe if it's a short book, the whole book again, now that they know what the word means. So that when they get to the word kelp, when they're reading about the oceans, they get a vision in their head of, oh yes, it's these green flowy things. I remember the picture. I might not be able to define it, but I have something there that's increased my knowledge. Something now when I see the word that I know a little about it, right? And so that's it. And then the questions and the answers and the conversation, the reading aloud, the fluency. The idea is each time they reread the book, they're doing something a little bit different with it. All right. So I know I've done a lot of talking. You've popped a few things in the chat room, and I appreciate that. But I do want to stop and allow you to sort of process the activities. So think about how you'll be able to use these activities with families in your work, or how you're going to teach the families to use these at home when you're not there. And there are just a couple of questions or prompts here. So pick one and pop an answer into the chat room. I want to kind of give you guys that time to process and share with me and share with each other. Will you use more than one of the strategies? Will you be able to teach families 2, 3, 4 of them? How will you use them? And then what more do you need? You know, this was kind of an overview and at a glance. If you've been, you know, a teacher, tutor, an advocate working with migratory families for a while, this might be enough for you to take away and go ahead and begin to work with the families. But if not, what more do you think you need? So I'll just give you a little bit of a minute to process that and pop some things into the chat room. I'll be looking for 3 people. 3 people. Pop something in the chat room. There we go. We've got our first taker. Yep. All right. Various texts available for students to read during tutoring time. Is that something that you have access to, something that you think you're going to need? You know, the way that I've presented these strategies in this family literacy time, these activities, today the kids are going to need things that they're interested in and that are at their reading level. All right, the 5-finger rule. I see somebody dropped something about that in the chat being helpful. Where to gauge just to start with. And remember, yeah, it's a good helper. It's a good starting point. It's the quick and dirty. If you can get some more information about their exact reading level or get someone to help you match books and kids' reading levels, that would be great. Oh, you have a lot of books, but where to put them? Oh. Giving the students choice, great. Okay. So it's good to see that you have some opportunity to share these strategies with kids who are already thinking about how to do it with kids and families. As I mentioned when I talked a little bit about the Impact Consortium at the beginning, one of our core goals or one of our primary focuses is to really support parents to know what they can do at home to support their children's learning. You all know, and we know, you know, they may not be able to make it to school for different meetings, but there's so much of family engagement, parent involvement that happens behind the scenes and happens at home. And we want to make sure that they have the knowledge and the skills and the resources and materials to be able to do that. And that they're confident in doing it and they know it doesn't matter where they come from, what language they speak, whether they're literate in any language or not, that they've got some strategies and the power to really have conversations and help their kids with learning at home. Somebody mentioned the consortium, and I didn't see that whole note in the chat yet, but I do have some additional resources that I want to share with you, or just some directions to point you. And since we have a few minutes, I'm going to go ahead and do that. So you can reach us at impactmep.net. As much as the consortium is 8 states, the materials, the resources, and the work that we do, they're available to all states, member and non-member states. What the member states have is the added responsibility of helping to pull together the resources like they did with these literacy activities and ensuring that they're evidence-based, and working with the Evidence Resource Center and figuring out how we're going to share them. The 8 states are responsible for sharing these with their families and gathering data on how their families use them, how often, which ones were most successful. So the mission for our impact states goes a little deeper, but all of the information and materials that we use and we gather or create are available to you all. And so I encourage you to look on our website. You'll probably want to look at the instructional materials tab at the top. There's some past presentations, both from our consortium, former iterations of this impact consortium, and outside agencies. And then additional resources. We now have added an events page, which I'm going to share with you. We've got some upcoming events. We put out a monthly newsletter. So if you're interested, all you have to do is go to the website, impactmep.net, and you can sign up for that newsletter. And then I just wanted to show you a sample of one of the newsletters. Each month, and it's been coming out around the middle of the month, somewhere between the 10th and the 15th of the month. But each newsletter has similar categories or sections. So one is family engagement, where we highlight a specific family engagement practice. Then we have a family literacy section. The family literacy section also highlights family literacy practices, as well as books and texts that we're calling out because of a particular reason. The May one that went out was about nonfictions, though all of the books and texts that were listed were mostly different kinds of magazines that had nonfiction articles in them that would be good for kids. We always have a community connections section and a health and well-being section. And I'll say, we try to make it interactive to the extent that a newsletter can be interactive, but it's got articles, organizations that you might want to connect to. We include videos and resources and more. And so sending you places, giving you things to look at, videos to watch, it's kind of packed full. So I encourage you to join and receive those directly. You can take a look at a couple of them. If it's not relevant to your work, or you're getting too many other newsletters and other things, you can always opt out at your convenience. But sign up and grab a couple of those. All right. Questions from you all. I mentioned our events page. Check that out on the website. We have a summer webinar series coming up. I'm going to offer one webinar each month on different materials and resources that the consortium has created or has available for use. And so take a look for that. And I think I saw some things in our chat here. So, all right, we need to take a look at the Impact Consortium and what it has to offer us if our state were to be part of the consortium, giving the students choice in reading. Good. So if you're not familiar with how the Consortium Incentive Grant Program works, it's through the Office of Migrant Ed. The grant applications typically come out every 3 years. And then, the states have to sort of organize themselves to apply for that. So we are in the first year of the new grant cycle. And then our next year will begin October 1, 2024 and run through September 2025. And then our final year will begin October 2025 and run through September 2026. So somewhere in early 2026 will be the next grant application cycle for this type of consortium incentive grant program. So I encourage you, to get with your local migrant director, your state migrant director, if that's something that you all are interested in, and having that conversation early on in preparation for the next grant cycle, because the states cannot join a consortium after the cycle has started. But remember, you have access to everything that you need. I'm going to drop a few things in here as you continue to put questions. So where to sign up for the newsletter? Thank you, Melissa. On our website, you can look at the bottom of that homepage and it will give you a link to sign up to the newsletter directly. Some of the other things I talked about were Unite for Literacy. If you just Google that, it'll come up, but it's uniteforliteracy.com. Before we entered the room today, in the Whova app, someone had asked about the parent portal for the online reading resources. So there are currently 2 reading consortia through this consortium incentive grant program. One is Impact, that's me. The other one is called MPEC, the Migrant Parent Empowerment Consortium. And they have the online reading resources that I believe the question was about. But I did want to drop this in here. They are migrantsliteracynet.com. They're an amazing consortium also. And we do very different things. So I encourage you to take a look at Migrant Literacy Net, which is their online reading tutorials. They have things available in reading, understand math. Also, they have a parent portal. And so you'll have to sign up. And I know that you can reach back out to me or reach out to Jessica at IDRC, who's sponsoring, this event. And she'll be able to put you in touch with their consortium coordinator directly if you're interested and need more information. And then my contact information, if anybody needs to follow up. So if you've got questions, keep them coming. I am going to ask you to use our impact session feedback form. So if you could take a minute, you can use the QR code there to get in. And we appreciate that. Every time that we present on something that we've done, in this case, the research, and we've got our states working on this as a family literacy kit where they're obligated to go out to a certain number of families and mentor and model these practices and then release the families to use them, check in and gather some data, as I mentioned. But the feedback forms really help us. It helps, and we take the information very seriously. So it helps, if there was something that was not well understood during the training, then I can go back and redesign how I present it. If the training was good and helpful and you are all able to use this information and it was relevant to your work, that's good feedback also.
And I'll go ahead and stop the recording. Thank you so much for presenting, Michelle. If somebody has questions off recording, you can go ahead and ask your questions.